All right, well, today I am so excited. We have TODD Robert Petersen joining us today. To introduce TODD Robert Petersen, he lives in Cedar City, Utah with his wife and 3 children. He is professor of English and the director of Southern Utah University's project-based learning program. His recent academic work focuses on film and television. Please join me in welcoming TODD Robert Petersen. Todd, so happy that you could join us today.
It's good to be here. I mean, it's here these days, but it's good to be, I guess, there or
right.
Everywhere, all the places.
All the places, yes. It's a way to get out, yes. So today we're going to be talking about your book. I have a copy of it right here. It needs to look like we tried. I have a copy, and you do too. So I have to tell you, Todd, and I'm not just saying this because I'm interviewing you, but I really enjoyed this book a lot, and I'm excited to talk to you and to pick your brain about it. I really enjoyed it. So this novel is a contemporary fiction. Am I right in labeling it that way? And it's not just one continuing story, it is a bunch of short stories. In fact, there's 6 short stories in here. And so what I wanted to ask you first, getting into it, is what inspired you to write it as short stories versus just a continuing novel? Why did you decide to write it that way?
Well, it's the story of this is quite long and involved, but it started, I was writing a book of short stories, a collection of short stories, and sent them out to Nat Sobel, who's my current agent. And he took a look at those and he said, you know what, I'd like you to come up with something that had them all integrated. And he took that first story, The Impeccable Driver, and he said, hey, look, I don't think I can do this book, but he just gave me a little advice. Rebuild this around something so that it kind of read and flowed like a novel, but keep this first chapter or keep this first thing. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about how that might be possible. Because we have this sense, I think, that when there's a novel, we're going to begin with a certain set of characters and we're going to stay with them all the way through until the novel's over. And I started thinking about life, and I started thinking about how there are those circumstances where you just kind of bump into people, where you start going, oh my gosh, this is so weird. This is such a small world. You know some people that I know. And I started thinking, could you structure a novel that way? Instead of by saying there's this one thing that sort of has this singular through line, could there be a whole bunch of stories where you get a little snapshot of a story or a moment with some characters, and then you go to something else, and then after a while you go, wait a minute. I think that these are connected. I think that there's a relationship here between this. And actually one of the precipitating events for how this all works is I was through the airport one time, and I ran into my dad and stepmom in the airport in Minnesota. He didn't know I was going to be there. I didn't know we were going to be there. And it was just, we were just going through the concourses together. And it was cool. He, like a good dad, he bought me lunch at Chili's there in the airport, and we talked. And I started thinking, again, there could be a pretty cool story that you tell where people start being able to use on their own. So that's kind of how that got all set up. And so it just kind of worked out that way. And now that it's done, I don't see them as individual stories. I see them kind of like there's this block of story that gets kind of divided up.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, there's this whole story, but here's the part that takes place in the desert with Doyle. And then here's the part of the story that is the people that are connected to Doyle. And here's the part so that by the time the end of the book is there, I feel, and I hope that the reader feels like, oh, this isn't separate at all. And then I was hoping to get that to be how people would think about their own lives. Our lives really are connected. So how could you write a book that would really show that lives are connected? Where, again, a lot of times a novel, sometimes my favorite novels, just really focus on one thing and drill down into it. I wanted it to be more like an ecosystem or a network and work like that.
Right, right. Well, I have to say, I thought it was so clever because you start out with that first one, The Impeccable Driver, and I like the titles that you gave the stories. And I'm a fan of short story novels. I love them. Sometimes it's fun if you don't have a lot of time, and sometimes I get over intimidated by really big, thick novels. And so it really appeals to me, the little short story novels, because then you can really get into story and you get, into it, and then you go to the next one, you really get into that one. And I like kind of pacing it. And I thought it was so clever that you took a character out of one, and that character was what linked it into the next story. And I have never seen that before. And I loved that. I loved how you did that. And I found myself trying to figure out, oh, who's going to be the one that's going to be about? And then I kind of thought, I think you took maybe the shady character or the villain of the story, and you kind of passed it on and carried it. Like, did you intentionally do that? Were you thinking it in that way when you wrote it?
Well, I don't know if I was thinking it, but it's one of those things that I observed after I got a draft. And that's one of the things that I noticed. I kind of, when I'm drafting something or getting started, I kind of am oblivious to what's going on. And it's when I get to the second draft or the third or the fifth or the 10th or whatever, that I come back and I go, oh, hey, wait a minute, something's going on. And so I feel like I got through that draft, and then I started noticing there were some things I was trying to tell myself with what I was writing. Because really, I feel like my first reader is me. Probably also my wife. She would actually demand to be considered one of the first readers, because I oftentimes write a passage and then read it to her, and then we talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when that process goes through, I'll go back and I'll say, oh, hey, wait a minute. I'm noticing something about this character. I want to do some more with that character. I want to polish that up, or I want to amp that kind of thing up. And then after a number of passes, it starts to feel really natural. But sometimes it's only just a little bit of an imagining, a little kind of twinkle that's maybe way off here on the side. And I have to decide whether or not I'm going to chase that down. So I also like the idea of sometimes somebody who is a villain in one story could be the hero of another story, or that somebody that is a villain in one story, we may come to understand them more deeply if we were to see that from another perspective. And I want to try to get that kind of thing going in my own life. As a teacher and a parent and a person in the community, I may see one thing and say, I have a way to judge this. And then if I think about the story behind the thing that I'm judging, then I go, oh, wait a minute, you know what, there's something to understand. And we could get there. But I love that you noticed that it makes me want to go back and take a look at some of these people, because there's some pretty dastardly people in this book.
There are. It was so well written. I was into it. I was laughing out loud. I was grabbing my husband and reading him excerpts out of the book. I visibly jumped at a couple of spots I was not expecting. And I love that in a story, having no idea where it's going or what's coming at me. It was good. It was really good.
I think that's one that maybe I'm speaking for way beyond what I should, but I think all authors want to know that somebody has read their book and that somebody has gone to someone else and grabbed them by the collar and forced that book upon them. And then that absolves authors from having to force our books on people. So I like that you could do
Yeah,
that.
I totally pushed on my husband. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to read kind of the synopsis of the book. And then I kind of wanted to just take a story and just kind of go over a couple of the stories through it. A fastidious man takes a detour on the way to his father's wedding and kicks off a series of events that ricochets from the bride to her real estate clients, to a crazed former homeowner and his sister-in-law's reality TV lover, to a hoarding family whose lives are wrecked by their appearance on the second-rate show. Their daughter decides to escape the gravity of her tiny town with the help of her boyfriend, who has a not quite legal plan to scrape together enough money to fund their departure. I thought that summed it up perfectly. I have to say, even just from the first book, the way that went, I was just like, oh, this is going to take me on a ride. I don't even know where I'm going to go. And I just didn't. And I have to say, my favorite story was Unscripted, about the the TV reality show. Because I've watched that, the home makeover movies, and you have oh, they're wonderful, but you never know. In the story, you come back to a 5-year reunion when they're What happened after? And you will have that for all those TV reality shows. They'll have this, oh, 5 years after, let's catch up with them. And the wreck that they come up with this family, I was laughing through it, even though it was tragic. I was just laughing. I just thought that was so hilarious. So tell me, in your writing, which one of these stories was your favorite? Which one was the easiest? And where did you get the ideas for all of this?
For a really long time, my favorite was, which one? I think it's chapter 2, Cape Cod Fear, which was one of the earliest stories in the whole piece. And one of the reasons that it was our favorite is we had this really, I had two kind of weird events in my life that prompted the story. So out of everything that was going on, that story is the closest to real life, even though it's the weirdest.
Oh, and that was the scariest one for me.
It was
when
really,
you think you're going to get this awesome house for a deal, but what happens when you have these people that won't move out?
So we had when we bought our first house here in Cedar City, we were young. Our daughter, who's now a senior in high school, she was like 18 months old. And we went in and we bought this house in one of the old neighborhoods in Cedar City. And it was one of those classic struggles that you see in Cedar City. Do I sell my house to some people with a lot of money who are looking to retire in a good community, or can we sell to someone here? The woman that sold us the house was adamant that she was going to sell it to a young family to help them get started, and it was really wonderful. And then after we bought the house, she started, like, we'd see her, and she would say stuff like, "How do you like living in my house?"
Oh.
And we were like, "Oh," but she's the nicest lady. She's nowhere near as terrible as that Condit fella from the story. But it just started getting my imagination going. And then a friend of mine who lives up in Provo, we were together at a conference. We do work in film studies together in adaptations of literature into film. And I was sitting with my friend Dennis, and he said that he and his wife did buy a house on a short sale, and that they did have somebody who would not move out because they were angry about the way that the turn of events had happened. You know, that there was the whole real estate bubble, and then it dropped out. And so Dennis told me this, and because we both study literature and film, we started feeling like it was sort of like that old movie, Cape Fear. We were thinking the Robert Mitchum one, but you know, there's also the one that had Robert De Niro in it. And so those two things just started to combine. You know, what would happen if you're young, you're working in a difficult real estate market, and then it started to be the story about younger generations and older generations. And so I started thinking about that stuff that turned out to be, okay, boomer, okay, Karen, and all this other kind of stuff where younger people, I'm a solid Gen Xer, but I wanted to make the couple in that story millennials, because I think it fit more for the time, about some of those people who maybe were further along in life, silent generation or whatever, just to split it. But anyways, for a long time, that was the big story for me, because it was kind of expressing through my imagination a little bit about what my life was like. And we'd run into the grocery store and run into this nice old lady, and she kept on saying, "How do you like living in my house?" And I'm like, "We love it, and we also like the mortgage payment." And so I was a little bit snippy and passive aggressive. The story that ended up being my favorite was one that my agent, when I had to do rewrites for the book to get it ready to go on the market, I kept rewriting it, and he just kept on saying, "No, no, no, redo it, fix it, no, no." And I would get so mad. I would walk around the house and I would yell and scream. And the thing was, he was right, and I had the wrong story, and he kept pushing me until I found the right story. In the first version of that, it was really about the father being upset that his son was so beautiful and so wonderful and just lazy. And then what I really wanted to do is say, I don't want to be the person telling that story. It doesn't even feel true to me. I just was kind of doing it because it fell in to the right place. So I ended up starting to get this deeper story about this kid, about a tragic loss of his mother. And then I started really wanting to explore writing about disability, which I've been doing.
Which you did a lot. Yes.
Yeah. And that was I'm blessed to not have to be living with a disability like that. But as I started reading, I learned that people with disabilities find it really hard to find themselves represented in a way that just makes them a complex person. So the son in that story, Eric, who's got the hearing loss and is just trying to kind of fix his life and put it all together, I started becoming really attached to that kid through my imagination.
I was attached to him too.
And so Providence, I think now, is my favorite story, mostly because of a lot of the background stuff that a reader would never see, but all of that time that my agent, like, I did this big revision of it over one summer and I submitted it to him and he said, I don't know, but somehow you've made it worse. And I just was like, oh no. But that was just the right mixture of kind of tough love to make me scrap that thing and then rewrite it into the way that I think it has a heart now. And that's what I think that my agent saw. He said, this story doesn't, it's just all like a hard exterior and it doesn't have any goodness in it. And that's what I wanted to try to make sure, that each of the chapters in this whole book had a kind of goodness and hope, even if there's terrible, kind of awful, rotten stuff happening. I feel like that's, people will relate to that, right?
Right.
A good life is something we want to live, but I feel like it's something that's so boring to read about. Here's a story where somebody wakes up, they have a very good day, they have an excellent meal, they spend some time in the evening with their family, read a book, and go to bed. That's such a nice day. But
that's nice, but it's boring to read.
That would be the worst story ever to read. So I feel like we have to focus on the life that we might want. And then I like to kind of write about all the things that keep us from having the life that we want.
So, and I was going to ask you that question also leading up to it. Some of these stories have some real tragedy the way they end, and other ones have some real vindication where you're like, yeah, they got theirs. So what made you decide how some stories ended in tragedy, other ones a little better? Like, how did you decide that with your different stories?
Whew. I wish I could be clever and say that this was something I decided. I think it's the stories told me what they wanted to be. So like I was saying, as I would move through each pass, I would try at the end of each pass to listen really carefully to what the characters were telling me, to what the story was telling me. And sometimes, like with Providence, I got it. I was listening to myself and I was not listening to the story and I was not listening to the characters. And so I don't want to tell the end because the end has that great big fun secret in it. But when I got to the end, I did not know what was going to happen. And I remember walking around the house with my like this with my hair saying, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. How can I have a book that doesn't end? I don't know what's going to happen. And then after worrying about it long enough, eventually we got to a point where it was like, I know what's supposed to happen. But I can't say that I figured it out. I think in a lot of ways it was just sort of waiting until the story did its thing. So that's what really some of them. That. But then I also wanted the book to kind of have some motion. I don't like the big roller coaster idea of a book where it goes rising action, rising action, rising action, rising action, climax, we're done. I kind of like things to move a little bit more like a sine wave. I like to be like something happened and then this happened, like, oh, here's a surprise. And then the book turns in a different direction. So I don't know if I have clean shapes for what we do, but I really love the book designer, the woman who designed the cover is Nicole Caputo, and she's a genius, I swear.
I love this cover. It looks awesome.
So when she does it based on reading it, and then to give this curve, I think is really, it's the great thing. It tells everybody who's gonna wonderful job, and it told me something secret about the book that I didn't know myself, really. It was kind of
so that brings up another question I had for you, is how did you come up with the title of the book? With all those different stories, how did you come up? It needs to look like we tried.
This is a great
this story.
So the final chapter of the book is called Small World,
which was perfect.
When I submitted it, we sold it with the title, and the very first thing that my editor Jack said when he came
Is it? Sorry, my thing paused. Can you? Is it working? Haven, did it pause?
Here we go. I think we got Todd back now.
Okay, sorry, Todd, you paused.
I know. I think I was saying something so intense that
You
it
were
like.
saying something so profound, and I'm like, I can't. What are you saying?
Where did I fall apart?
You were just talking about the title. I didn't even get any of that title. Did anybody else? I don't think.
Oh,
So start
can go
again
back.
on the title. Okay, yes.
So we sold the book with the title Small World, which is the title of the final chapter. Because I wanted to really play with that idea of, oh, hey, man, small world. People know each other. And I was thinking about Stanley Milgram's experiments with social networking, which is what got us 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon and all those other kinds of these ideas I wanted.
Well, I was reading it. It seemed like that. Someone's connected to everybody.
And so when I had my first call with the editor, he goes, "This is great. We love the book. We're not doing this title." And one of the reasons is there's an amusement park in Southern California and in Florida that has some attractions and a song that had the same title. So you kind of know where I'm going. They said, we're just not going to put this title out there in the middle of what could, be some kind of like legal claim. Even though copyright law doesn't let you copyright titles, he just wanted to kind of stay out of the fray there. So basically what they did is they said, go back in and give us some titles so that we could work on it. And I just went back and reread the whole book, and I looked for language that kind of popped out. And so right in the middle of that story, chapter Unscripted, there's a moment when everything's falling to pieces and the TV crew comes together and they're like, what are we going to do next? And one of the TV people says, well, look, I don't know what we're going to do, but it needs to look like we tried. And so I kind of pulled that together and then sent it forward in a email list to the editorial team. I had about 9 things on there. And within, I would say, like 3 minutes of me sending the email, all the emails came back that said, this is it. This is what we're going to do. And then it was a really fun title while we were going through in production and going through marketing, to have all these emails that say, it needs to look like we tried. And when I was on book tour for it in May of 2018, I would show up in bookstores all over the West Coast and in Flagstaff and all this kind of stuff up in Salt Lake. And people would just have the book up on the front counter going, this, every time somebody comes in, I just talk about this title. Because I think at this point in time, maybe perfection is maybe a little bit too much to expect. And so
a little overrated.
And so we have a lot of jokes around my family and friends and people that know the book that we joke a lot now. It just says it needs to look like we tried, which is a great way of consoling people that like you did a pretty good job. It didn't look like you didn't try, or something like that. But it's been really fun to have a title like that, and it also helped me realize that there's a part of writing books that you do by yourself. You kind of have to sit in a room and do the make-believe part, use your imagination, tap into your creativity on your own. And then there's a part of this that's a team sport. It's the people that are really advocating for your book. So it's your agent, it's your editor, it's the marketing people, the publicity people. It's all the people who are going to kind of help support and talk about a book. And then it feels at that point like it's not this thing that you're doing by yourself, but it's almost kind of like in those concerts when someone the singer like dives out into the crowd and gets carried around by people. And that's what it feels like for this part of the writing. This book is out there, and it's no good unless people read it. It's no good unless people know what's going on. And so you have all of these people contribute. And so, yeah, the title of my book is It Needs to Look Like We Tried, but that title came up from this whole team, these wonderful people at my press that could get behind the book and kind of help me figure out the best way for it to be itself. And they do that all the way through with all the stuff inside the book, like they're saying too, the cover, the title, all of that kind of stuff is just marvelous. And that's the part that I think I didn't learn until a lot later in my writing career, was that I thought I'd kind of be doing it by myself, kind of like a little creative hermit. And it doesn't turn out that way at all. You get to be involved with some pretty marvelous people
Yeah, there's a lot of people. You get that when you look at the thank yous at the end. It's never just a couple of people. It goes pages.
Oh yeah. The next book I'm working on right now, I haven't done the acknowledgments page, although I've sent the manuscript into copy editing. And so it's one of those things like I'm going to forget somebody. There's so many people. I have people that I call. I have a police officer friend of mine in Oregon who every time there's a police officer in any kind of thing, I call Matt or I get him on Facebook, and then he goes, I don't know, but I'll ask around. And there's some times when my dad was a John Deere tractor sales person for years and years and years. So when I have tractor and heavy equipment questions or car questions, I go and I talk to my dad. When I had some questions related to the production of crystal meth, and I had a friend who was a chemist who had tested out some street recipes for crystal meth for law enforcement to find out if they were legit. And so I called her and I said, I don't know if we're in a surveillance state or not, but as I was writing this book, I kept feeling like if the FBI got a hold of my browser history or the phone call,
you could be in trouble.
I mean, yeah, I do some, this book and a lot of the next book are kind of loosely in the kind of area of kind of crime fiction. But I swear, when I'm looking up things like how long does it take a body to decompose? How fast could a vulture consume a human being? I was like, my browser history is nuts.
You're like, I swear I'm writing a book. I'm just writing research.
I got so nervous about it in the recent book that I wrote a scene about someone who came to look something up in the library. And the librarians were like, should we call the cops or what's our responsibility? And I know a lot of librarians and they're like, yeah, I don't know if we can, but this person's really suspicious. So that was just my way of processing out this tremendous guilt I felt for looking up all kinds of weird and horrible and terrible things. But one of the things I stumbled on in research when I was writing Providence was to learn what it would sound like to have cochlear implants. And I found that had a best approximation. And so I was in my office trying to figure out how to write these scenes with headphones on, trying to learn what would that actually sound like. And that was tremendously enlightening. So there is some good stuff that is also in my housing history. So
I thought it was really clever when you did the cochlear implants when I was reading it, because I was curious, what would that? And then he has that little interaction with that one guy during it where he starts asking him those questions. Can you really hear? Does it sound like normal noise? And I was reading it thinking, that's exactly what I'm wondering. Do those actually work? Can you hear real noise, or is it just like pretend sound? I like how you said it's like cherry flavor, but is it really cherry?
And a lot of that was me trying to use my imagination, but I read, there's some really wonderful online forums for people who got cochlear implants. They were talking to other people who were considering it. So I read a lot of what they were saying in their own voices, and they're like, it is so difficult, particularly for people who have been deaf for their entire life and never had a period of hearing. They don't have anything to compare it to. And sometimes it's really hard for people who have had some hearing for a while, or they had their hearing deteriorate and then they went in to have the implants because they're like, it just feels false. And so that's what I let that character who had a portion of his life with hearing, but a significant portion of his life without. And I suspect that I didn't get it exactly right to the experience, but I was really trying to figure out, what would that moment be like, or what would a person like that be like? And hopefully I sort of figured it out. I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody who's deaf that read it. I talked to a number of people who worked with deaf people and could sign and tried to learn as much as I could about the cultural side of being deaf. But again, I think that's what research plus the imagination can do for a writer, because there's no way to know everything. So I suppose I don't cotton to write what you know. I kind of like the idea, write what you would love to know better, and then use that as this occasion to teach yourself more. Because I feel like my life experiences be so limited. There's only so many times people would want to read about me going down to Ernie's for chicken fingers. I mean, my life here
entertaining the first time.
Right. My life here in Cedar City is pretty simple. And so in a lot of ways, I like to think of writing as a way of getting out.
Well, Todd, I have to say, I love the characters that you created for each one of these stories. And when you only have just so much time to introduce new characters and give us a feel for them so that you can connect and you cheer for them or you cheer against them, it was so clever. And you gave each one of these characters so many layers, so many ways. And even in the last one where you had the boy with the cochlear implants, and he seems like, oh, what is wrong with him? And then you can find out through it why he is or why he chooses the things that he does. And I have to say, I don't know if I can even pick out a favorite character. I know my favorite villain was Chuck Vogel. I loved everything that happened with him. He was great. But tell me, who was your favorite character? Who was the funnest one to write? Who did you relate to the most?
I love Chuck Vogel too. I mean, to hate him, it was really something. But you can't like this guy because he's terrible.
Oh, awful.
And I tried to let Vogel be all of the terrible people, top to bottom, and just sort of put them all in one great big Home Depot bucket, you know, and let him be that way. Favorite characters. I really love. It's a very small character, and it's almost hard to talk about this character without giving anything away. But there's a character who's on the television crew in Unscripted, and she has a very, very small role, but she is the one who puts the martial arts moves on Chuck Vogel.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yes. I was like, yes.
She is by far one of my favorite characters. But the character that surprised me the most and kind of took the wind out of me when I was writing him was Hoot Jessup.
Oh, I loved Hoot.
So I'd have to say I loved being able to put a lot of anger and outrage into Chuck Vogel, but Hoot surprised me. Early versions of the story, he's very different. But when he talked about his marriage vows to his wife.
Yes, I love that part of the story. Oh, it just hit me right here. I was like, yes, that's true.
I ended up falling in love with that character. And a lot of it was because I think sometimes, you know, the Jessup family, they're poor.
Dysfunctional.
Yep. And I think that it's easy to dismiss them. And I just said to myself, I don't want to walk away from this chapter with Hoot Jessup being a fool. I think it's pretty easy for us to turn a lot of poor folk in this country into fools, and they're not. And so that was my goal. And by the time I was done writing him, he's the dearest to my heart.
He was me too, I think. And I loved that story. It just, instead of just seeing this messed up family where you're thinking, what is wrong with these people? You end up really caring about them and seeing even through the dysfunction that they were people. And I just really felt for them.
And I think that's what we do, right? I mean, I had a friend of mine send me a message about 2 weeks that says, if you have not watched Tiger King, you have got to do it. And just because he knew
Tiger King.
he knew the things that I felt in love with. And I haven't had the courage to do it yet because I feel like that show maybe is turning those people into fools. And I think the Duck Dynasty and some of these other shows that I tried to base a little bit of what I was writing about do that, when what we really have is an opportunity to understand some of the really important differences in class in this country that we just don't talk about. And I think that they're really, really important. Particularly, I think if you've gotten to a point where you have some privilege in your life. I mean, to be a college professor, I think is one of those places of privilege. And if you start, comedians say that you never punch down, right? If you're going to always kind of go on the satirical offense, you want to punch up.
Yeah, you punch down, people hate you.
Right. And so that's what I wanted to make sure that did not happen in this book, is that I was punching down. That if we want to take some people who are kind of way up, media influencers, like we were talking about, these reality.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can pinch up to those people.
But sometimes the people like the Jessup family, they need to be understood instead. And, I don't know. When I get talking about that part of it, it makes it seem maybe like the book's not funny. And I was like, But it is funny a
Oh
little bit.
no, it is. No, it totally is. So Todd, I'm going to go and we're going to do a question and answer. I'm going to open it up to anybody who wants to type in a question to ask you. I'm going to give you a couple of questions that people have typed in. You ready? Okay.
Yep.
All right.
My Wonder Woman glass. So I'll read.
Give you some power. Get recharged. Okay. So from Katie, she asked about how long did it take you to write and produce this book? Good question.
That is a really good question. Longer than I think most people will want to hear. From the when I told you I had written that agent and he said, I don't think I can do this book, to when he said, hey, this is fantastic, let's work on this. That was 13 years.
Oh, 13?
Yeah, and I did some other
other
things. I did some other things between. So I had a short story collection for which the Impeccable Driver came out of it, but I didn't have any of the other components. And then as I was working on that, I got some other opportunities to publish some other things. I wrote a book about two crotchety old men up in San Pete County. I did the work that I was doing at my university to kind of move towards tenure and all that other kind of stuff. Had 3 kids. My wife did a master's degree and started her career. She's also an SU faculty member. So in that, it's sort of like in a recipe, you know, where it says there's like active time and total time. So maybe the bread will take you 10 minutes, but it has to rise for 10 hours. I think that's a lot about how the book worked. Like I kind of was doing this project in between other things. And then, so yeah, later, I had my agent say, it took 13 years to get to this point, but this is pretty great. And,
well, I think it's pretty great.
And so that's what I don't think most projects take that long. But this is just, I think it's important too. You know, I've been working on this for a while. Some of the people that kind of read the book and gave early praise said this really feels like a book that's just sort of right for our time. It came out right in 2016, which was when our country kind of changed. So I think that it fit. So sometimes I think a book can come out when it's supposed to. And so that's why it took this long. The next book that I just wrapped up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how long did that one take?
That one came a lot faster, mostly because it's sold. My agent sold it as a 2-book deal. So there was like 3 chapters, maybe 25 pages of the second book. And they bought both of them together. And so I had to turn around and deliver. So I didn't have time to dilly-dally or whatever. So I was like working, coming home, putting kids to bed, writing until really late. And I started that one in 2016. And so that one came a lot faster because it had to.
Yeah, when you have a deadline, maybe the motivation. All right, well, I have another question from Christopher. What is your favorite part of the writing process and the least favorite part?
Oof. Favorite is when it works. I actually would suppose that I kind of break my writing process into kind of like conceptualization, drafting, revision. So conceptualization is not actually my favorite. It's sort of like when you have to like do a big project, like building a deck or something. That's the part of like figuring out what the deck's going to be, getting rid of all the old garbage plants, making sure the soil, there's all this kind of preliminary work that has to be done, but it's really not exciting. And then there's drafting, and that's the part that I like the best. That's when you're really like doing it and you're kind of going from 0 to something. And so you get this idea that this is gonna kind of move forward. Revision, I like it, but I do not like it. It's sort of like that old Dorothy Parker quote, I do not like revising, but I like having revised. So when everything is kind of smoothed out, it's great, but it's something that taxes my brain a little bit in ways that are not my favorite. And I feel like I've used a lot of brain muscles at the end of revising that I don't normally use. So favorite, drafting. Second to least favorite, conceptualization. Absolutely the least favorite is revising. and maybe copy editing, which is we'll do next. And that's where we like, is this actually capitalized or not, or whatever this and that, or comma rules, all the stuff that's way for the end.
Oh yeah, all those English rules.
Yep, and then I'm sure they'll be sending that draft back to me soon, and I'll begin on that. But what's wonderful about those things is you get to do it with people, and that's part of that sports thing. They those people know way more about this stuff than I do.
So I have a question. A couple of people have asked, where in Cedar City can they find this book? And is it available at the SUU bookstore?
I think it is. The last time I checked.
It should be.
It's been a while. I haven't been down there for a while, but I know Main Street Books has carried it, and I know that it's been available at the SUU bookstore. But one of the things that I'd love to mention now is there is a phenomenal thing that just popped up this year called bookshop..Org. And it's kind of a new online seller that can sell books, that you can buy books from independent bookstores instead of from Amazon. And it's really marvelous for lots of reasons. And they're just phenomenal. So I'm like, if you could buy a book locally, you should absolutely do it locally. That helps these businesses keep going. If there isn't a store around you and you can't get to one, the bookshop.org will absolutely connect you with an independent bookstore somewhere. And then they'll make a sale. And the prices are almost exactly the same. And the shipping is just only slightly longer. And in fact, it's a little bit better now that Amazon has done the COVID prioritization.
Yes, when they feel like it, they'll send it to you.
And then this amazing organization, like how waiters and bus people in a restaurant will like split tips. They take some of the profit from this and they share it across all of the independent bookstores that are involved. So it's just so cool. So absolutely go down to Main Street Books and see if they've got some copies. If that doesn't work or you're housebound and you can't get that out there, really try that other independent store, bookshop.org, that can help you find a bookstore that could really use that help. And they've raised almost $1 million for independent bookstores in addition to by profit sharing with the sales. It's a really cool new model, and I think I have so much respect for what they're doing.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so another question from Jill. How is the structure of the chapters in a novel different from chapters in a collection of connected short stories? Do you think a novel has the luxury of chapters where nothing really exciting happens, but the plot moves forward?
That was a really great question. In my classes, I have a little routine that I do that I stole from Parliament Funk because I got that song that says, "Get up on the downstroke." And so I talk about these waves that I do. And I always feel like a novel chapter has to get up on the downstroke, which means you have the story and that goes in and there's a whole bunch of energy in the story. Then it kind of, tops out and there's a little bit of a relaxing. And a short story keeps going down until it's done. A chapter has to go down and then pick up right before it ends. And that we know that structure a lot from like a cliffhanger. So it goes boom. And then right before it's going to all the way end, something new's got to happen that says, "Oh, keep going," and that's going to kind of move along that way. And I think that's what I try to do, is sort of part of a short story structure so that it can feel like it closes down on its end, and then part of a pick up and keep going and pointing in a direction, because that's what a novel wants to keep you doing, is like keep reading, keep going. Not necessarily a traditional cliffhanger, but something where if we're talking about energy release, it comes out, it releases some energy, and it doesn't release it all the way. It starts to pick up and go again. And that's what I was trying to structure in this one. In the novel that I just finished, I try to do that a lot. Like, yes, action that's happening in that chapter resolved itself, but then, oh, wait a minute, there is something new that has just been introduced that now attracts the reader's attention and kind of pushes them into the next thing. You do that all the way till the end, and then the very, very end of a novel should end all the way on the downstroke. It should close itself down and make a reader go, yes. It shouldn't make a reader go, I want more from this book. Now, if it's a trilogy, you should make that. It should make them go, I want to know more.
Right, it should be a cliffhanger.
Right. Yeah. But if it's its own self-contained thing, you should You should feel done, and you should put the book down, and like it so happens with my favorite books, and go, this is a bummer. I really love this book, and I'm so bummed that it's over. But at least you can kind of accept that it's right that it's over. If you read a book and it's over, and you don't feel like it should be over, then maybe that got structured a little bit wrong. It's sort of like a meal. You should eat exactly the right amount of food to not want to eat any more food, but to not feel gross. I don't often hit that perfect spot, but when I do, it's pretty great.
It's good. It's awesome. So Dennis typed in, a couple of years ago, I went to Powell's City of Books on Burnside Street in Portland. Found it needs to look like we tried right where it should have been. Being a Portland native, describe the rush of having your new book at Powell's.
I got a chance to do a reading at Powell's, the one that's not downtown, but the one that's on the southeast side. And it was really a bucket list thing. It was the bookstore I grew up with. It was the bookstore I hung out with. It was the bookstore that my friends and I would test out, like whether or not we'd like people. If we took them to the bookstore and they were like, a bookstore, this is the worst. Then they're like, oh man, I don't know if we're gonna get along. So getting a chance to be out there in one of the stores, it was absolutely mind blowing. To see the book in that shelf, to talk to the people, and because in my mind, that's sort of like the bookstore template in my mind. Like that's what a bookstore should be. But anytime I see it out there, oftentimes authors call it like spotted in the wild. You see your book out there in a real bookshelf, it's marvelous. The only thing that's better, I had one chance when I was at Skylight Books in Los Angeles to hand sell my book to a customer. We were doing a reading there, and I was kind of walking around waiting for it to go, and this lady was standing right next to it with 2 books in her hand. And she turned to look at me and she said, which one should I get? And I said, well, I have to know, I'm a little bit partial to it, needs to look like we tried. And I can't remember for the life of me what the other book was. It's a good book and I like it. But I said, and then she looked up and she saw my picture on the poster and she nodded and she said, okay, I'll do this one today. So that was the biggest thrill. And then they said, thanks for doing the event and for hand selling for us today. That was a lot of fun. That was a good question.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Is amazing.
I'll have someday I'll make it up there and I'm going to go visit that. I love bookstores. So Matt,
bring an extra suitcase. That's all I have to say.
An extra. Oh, I will. So Matt says, what about the great characters I heard about around the campfire a couple of miles from Calf Creek?
Ooh, I'm trying to remember. I know
Does
this
that
map.
sound familiar?
I'm trying to remember which ones we were talking about there. We have to, he's going to have to help me out because Matt's a friend of mine and we spent a lot of time talking about possibilities of characters. And
he says Milo question mark.
Oh, yes. So I think Matt's talking about, this was the development of Dr. Science's friend. There's a chapter called the Dr. Science.
Oh, yes. Okay.
About a man who runs a children's science program, and he is being, how they say, he's being superannuated. They're deciding that his old way of doing children's television is not as good as the new way of doing television. And he has a friend who is a puppeteer, and his puppet's name is Milo. And his friend is finding his way back into his Jewish faith. And he has taken all the money from the success of his puppet, from the licensing of his puppet, and he turned it in. He was doing avant-garde puppet theater based on classic Jewish stories and texts. And so he had a puppet theater in Brooklyn called Aleph Ayin. And I just sort of handled a lot of kind of religious and philosophical thinking into this puppeteer who I forgot that he's one of my favorite characters.
He's a great character.
Now I'm all wistful, but I wanted to give a character again who was a really good friend, and that what he was doing with his friend, in addition to doing that, was maybe also functioning as a little bit of a spirit guide. And I thought, what better spirit guide would there be than maybe some guy who like did a puppet.
Right. They would be fantastic.
Anyways, yeah. So Matt and I spent a lot of time out in the wilderness kind of talking about these characters before they sort of made their
That's how they get, yeah, right, get into your story. So Todd, our hour's wrapping up. That has gone by so fast. I have enjoyed this, talking about your book. It's awesome. So I just want to talk with you a couple of things really quick before we end. You had a couple of books that you've been reading. Do you have any recommendations? You sent me a writing link for creative writing for anybody who wants to join in. I will, let me see.
Yeah, I had this amazing.
Put that into everybody.
I had this amazing.
I'll type it in the chat box.
This spring in contemporary literature with SUU students. And at the end of the class, they all made some recommendations, books that they discovered that they felt like they should read and whatever. And so they started asking me if there was a way for us to kind of keep in touch and to share these books and to share some of the creative writing exercises. So it gave me the idea, hey, why don't I put together an email newsletter? And so some of the students from that class have signed up for that letter. And I started thinking this would be a really cool way to connect people from our community and students from my classes, since they're not even in the class, that every couple of weeks I can share some books. They can share some books maybe. I'd love to invite some of them to write and share some of their ideas. And then that we can just sort of keep a connection going, because I figure it's going to be a while before this social distancing thing starts to resolve itself in a safe way. And if we end up in a situation in the fall or the winter again where we have to kind of separate ourselves out.
And it could, you never know. You just never know.
Then I would just kind of wanted to have a pipeline in place. And so anybody who wants to kind of sign up and join up for that letter, I was going to send the first one out at the end of this week on May 1st with a little bit of an exercise and a selection of some of the books. My students recommended like 100 different books from the research they're doing, and they all seem like they're fantastic.
And I just put that link in the chat for everybody who's wondering about that creative writing. How do you say that? Mailchai.mp. Anyway, I have that for any of the links there if you'd like.
So I want to make a pitch for the library. Here's a book that I go down and I pick new books. This is Nomadland, and it's about people who are living in their campers. And that's a little hint. My next book, not the one that's heading out now, that's called Picnic in the Ruins. The next plan is a little bit of a murder mystery that's surrounded in the world of RVs, and maybe
that'd be interesting.
And UFOs, since the Pentagon has released those videos. So this
will be interesting.
That talks about how in this economy people have started to kind of pick up and move around and have a kind of digital nomad life. So that's kind of a fun thing that I was doing. This is a craft book that I'm going to be start reading soon. A colleague gave me this spring. Benjamin, just awesome. He writes comic books and novels, and he's just sort of my hero. And so I'm really excited to read his craft essays. And then I have a weird thing that I do. I like to read about stuff I don't know anything about, and I found this lovely book.
That's a cool cover.
Yeah, it's so gorgeous. And this is a book about physics, particularly about time. He's written another book about physics as well. And so it just helps me kind of remember like what it's like to read something that you don't really know anything about. And
and you can't even tell from the cover what it's about either. Yeah,
science and good science writing is something that's really remarkable to me, the ability to express these abstract concepts. So that's kind of the range of the stuff that I like to do. But also, I'm a big reader of comics. So I'm reading Superman Up in the Sky right now, which is a whole series of Superman comics written by Tom King, who's an ex-CIA operative and like one of the neatest, weirdest, most interesting individuals around. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
Oh, that sounds awesome. Well, thank you, Todd, for taking this time to interview with me. I love all those ideas. We're going to make this creative writing link available too when we post this later on. We'll find a link to put it on so people can find that easier. So thank you so much for coming on, and everybody go out. It needs to look like we tried. And I want to put in a little plug. Rosalind Eves typed in that she just want to put in the plug for indie bookstores. Main Street Bookstores is happy to order any book you'd like, have it shipped to you. Book Bungalow and St. George is also happy to ship directly to you, just like you were saying, Todd. Those are awesome. Thank you. So thank you for joining me today on Community Reads, everybody. We have just enjoyed having Todd. Next week, we're going to have motivational speaker and long distance runner Corey Reese. So make sure to join in for that. That should be fantastic. Until then, keep learning and be wise. Thank you.
And from all of us here at SUU Community Education, we hope you enjoyed learning something new. You can watch the recording of this and all of our classes at suu.edu/keeplearning or follow our YouTube channel named Be Wise Keep Learning. Thank you all for joining today and have a great day.